Close your eyes. You were bought once, like an animal, to die for other men's entertainment. Less than 2 years later, an entire empire was afraid of your name. Tonight, you're going to live that story from the inside, not as a bystander watching history happen, as the man it happened to. Every scene is going to move fast, because his life moved fast, from a chained slave to the single greatest threat Rome had faced in a generation. In under 2 years, let it pull you forward the way it pulled an entire empire's attention toward one man. And when it's finally done, let it drop you all at once into the deepest kind of sleep. Breathe in. This is Spartacus. And tomorrow, you are him. You don't remember the exact day it started. No one ever does. But you remember Thrace, cold mountains, hard winters, a people who had never once bowed easily to anyone. Roman or otherwise, you grew up here believing your life belonged to you. That belief will not survive long. Thrace sits on the edge of Rome's ambition, a rough mountainous region that empires have always wanted and rarely managed to hold completely. You were raised among people who fought when they had to, not for glory, but because the alternative was worse. You learned to move quietly through unfamiliar terrain before you learned much else. You learned that a blade in trained hands was the difference between deciding your own fate and having it decided for you. None of it will be enough. Somewhere in your service, accounts differ, and history itself isn't entirely sure. You end up fighting under Rome's banner, not against it. A soldier, maybe. An auxiliary. The details blur here, the way early chapters of a life often do before the moment that defines everything. What isn't blurry is what comes next. You are captured. Whether through desertion, rebellion, or simple bad fortune, the outcome is identical either way. The life you knew ends in an instant, and a new one begins that you never agreed to. You are enslaved, and somewhere in that first cold night in chains, you feel something settle into your chest that will still be burning 2 years from now. When your name alone is enough to make an empire reroute its legions, you are not the kind of man built to stay owned. You don't know it yet. But this is only the beginning of how far Rome intends to take this. Slavery on its own isn't the worst thing waiting for you. Rome has decided what to do with men like you, men taken in the provinces, strong, hardened, useful for one specific purpose. You are sold, then sold again. Each transaction strips away a little more of whatever name you carried into this, until eventually you arrive somewhere far south in Italy, at a place built for exactly one outcome. Capua, a gladiator school. You don't know the word yet in the language they're forcing on you, but you understand the concept instantly. The moment you see the training yard, men your age and younger, moving through brutal drills under the eyes of guards who watch them not like soldiers, but like livestock being conditioned for slaughter. This is what you were bought for, not labor, not service. Entertainment. You are going to be trained, fed just enough to stay strong, and sent into an arena to kill or be killed, for the amusement of wealthy Romans who will Never once learn your real name. You feel something cold settle into your chest as that understanding lands fully. This is not survival any more. This is a countdown. The training here is not meant to make you a soldier. Soldiers are trained to win wars. You are being trained to die well. Every day begins before sunrise. Drills with wooden weapons that leave bruises deep enough to still ache the following morning. Sparring matches supervised by men who care only about whether the crowd someday will find your death entertaining enough. You learn the weight of a real blade in your hand for the first time here, not as a tool of freedom, but as a prop in someone else's spectacle. Around you, other captured men, Thracians like yourself, Gauls, Germans, men from a dozen conquered peoples Rome has swallowed whole, go through the same brutal routine, day after day, most of them too broken already to imagine anything beyond simple survival until the next meal. You are not most of them. Something in you refuses to fully break, no matter how many times the training tries to grind it down. You watch, you learn, not just the fighting, the rhythms of the school itself. Who guards which gate when the watch changes, where the weapons are kept when they're not strapped to a gladiator's hands for training. You are all ready, without fully admitting it to yourself yet, planning something no one here has managed before at night, in the cramped, airless quarters where they lock you away like cargo. You begin speaking quietly with the men nearest you, careful words, testing words, feeling out who among them still has enough fire left to risk everything on a single, desperate chance. Some do around 70 of them, eventually, decide they'd rather die trying than die entertaining. You don't know it yet. Standing in the dark that first night, the plan takes real shape, but you are about to do something that has never once succeeded at this scale. You are about to break Rome's machine from the inside. They don't wait long to test what they've built. You're pushed into a smaller arena first, not the great stone amphitheaters you'll hear about later, just a dusty practice yard ringed by a handful of paying spectators. Wealthy men from Capua who've paid for an early look at the school's newest stock. This is a rehearsal for the real thing. It is not, in any sense that matters, a rehearsal for the man across from you. He's Gallic, older than you, a body carved by the same brutal training regimen you've only just begun to survive. You don't know his name. You will never know his name. That's by design. Men who might someday face each other are kept from becoming anything more than opponents, because friendship makes for hesitant killing, and hesitant killing is bad for business. The signal comes fast, no ceremony, no warning beyond a shout from the trainers ringing the yard. You don't remember deciding to move. Your body decides for you, months of drilled reflex taking over before conscious thought can catch up. Wood and iron meet in a blur you'll only fully process afterward. In the silence of your locked quarters that night, replaying it again and again in the dark, it ends fast. You feel the moment it ends before you fully understand what's happened. A give and resistance where there shouldn't be one. A sound you'll hear again in memory for the rest of your life, whether you want to or not. The spectators applaud that you stand there in the sudden quiet beneath their approval, breathing hard, a stranger's blood cooling on your hands, and you feel something crystallize inside your chest that has nothing to do with pride, and everything to do with certainty. This cannot be the rest of your life, whatever it costs. Whatever the odds, you are not going to keep doing this until it's your own blood cooling on someone else's hands, spent for the entertainment of men who will forget your name before the applause even finishes. That night, for the first time, you start listening more closely to the quiet, careful conversations happening among the other captured men after the guards. Think everyone's asleep. The night finally arrives, and every second of it moves faster than you're ready for. You have no real weapons. Gladiator schools aren't careless enough to leave armed men unsupervised. What you have instead is worse than nothing on paper, and somehow enough anyway. Kitchen knives, meat cleavers, sharpened cooking skewers, whatever the kitchens leave lying around that a desperate man can turn into something capable of killing. You move fast. The guards nearest the kitchen don't expect resistance from men they've spent months conditioning to expect nothing but obedience. That assumption costs them everything. Within minutes, the small group nearest you has overwhelmed the closest watch, and the sound of that first violent success ripples through the compound faster than any guard can contain it. More men join. Chains are broken. Doors that were never meant to open from the inside are forced open anyway. You don't stop to think about what happens if this fails. There isn't time, and there's no version of failure here that's survivable anyway. You fight your way toward the gate with the others, kitchen blades against Roman steel, adrenaline doing what training alone never could. And somehow, against odds that should have crushed this before it even started, it works that you are outside the walls. You are free, for the first time since Thrace. Actually free, standing in the dark with roughly 70 other escaped men. No plan beyond this exact moment, and an entire empire that doesn't yet know you exist. That won't last long. You don't have anywhere obvious to run. No home waiting. No allies gathered. Just 70 exhausted, half-armed men, and a very short amount of time before Rome organizes a response. You choose Vesuvius. Not because it's safe. Nothing about a volcano's slopes is safe in any conventional sense, but because it's defensible, its narrow approaches easy to hold, against a larger force with far fewer men than an open battlefield would require. Don't you climb. The mountain becomes your first fortress, and in those early days, survival is the only strategy that matters. Food, weapons, information, all of it has to be taken, improvised, or stolen from the surrounding countryside, because none of it is coming to you willingly, but something starts happening that you didn't fully anticipate. Word spreads, slaves across the region, on farms, in kitchens, in mines, in every corner of a system built entirely on the assumption that men like you would never dare do exactly what you just did. Start hearing about 70 gladiators who broke free and are still, somehow still free. They start leaving, not all at once, not in some grand organized migration, just a trickle at first, a handful of runaway field slaves finding their way up the mountain, then a few dozen more, then enough that you stop being able to keep track of every new face joining your fire at night. 70 becomes hundreds, hundreds become thousands. You feel the shape of something enormous beginning to form around you, something you never planned for back when the only goal was simply surviving the night of the escape. This is no longer 70 desperate men hiding on a mountainside. This is becoming an army. Numbers alone don't make an army. You learn that fast, standing in the middle of a camp swelling faster than you know how to organize it. Most of the people climbing that mountain to reach you have never held a weapon with intent to use it. Field hands, household slaves, shepherds, people who spent their whole lives being told exactly what to do. Now looking to you, a former gladiator with no formal command experience of his own, to tell them what comes next. You feel the weight of that expectation differently than you felt the weight of the arena. That was about surviving one fight. This is about keeping thousands of desperate, untrained people alive against an empire that will eventually stop underestimating all of you. You start with what you know. Discipline, drilled the way it was drilled into you, minus the cruelty that defined your own training. Formation, coordination, the simple, essential skill of moving together rather than as a scattered mob that any organized force could cut apart in minutes. You share command where it makes sense. Other capable men, Crassus among them fierce and popular, already commanding real loyalty of his own, taking pieces of the growing army under their own direction. You feel, in these early weeks, a rough, hard-won unity holding all of it together, forged less from agreement on strategy and more from the simple shared fact of what every single person in this camp has escaped from at night. Around fires scattered across the mountainside, you hear fragments of 100 different stories, men and women describing farms, households, mines, each account different in its details and identical in its core. Everyone here knows exactly what waits. For them, if this fails, recapture, punishment, designed specifically to make an example of anyone who dared imagine freedom was possible. That shared understanding does something training alone never could. It makes people fight like their lives depend on it. Because they genuinely do, you feel something settle into your own chest, watching this rough, desperate collection of former slaves slowly start moving and thinking like a real army, rather than a fleeing crowd. Rome hasn't sent its real attention yet. When it finally does, you intend for it to find something far more organized than anyone in the Senate is currently imagining. When word of the uprising first reaches Rome, no one takes it seriously. Why would they? You are, in their eyes, nothing more than an inconvenience, a slave revolt, the kind that flares up occasionally in the provinces and gets stamped out within weeks by whatever second-rate force happens to be nearby. Rome doesn't send its best legions to deal with this. It sends a small, unremarkable force, expecting the whole matter to be resolved before most senators even finish hearing the report. You feel that underestimation the moment their first force arrives at the base of your mountain. Confident, undisciplined, treating this like a formality rather than a genuine threat. They surround the only path they believe leads down from your position. They don't know about the other way. Down using ropes woven from wild vines growing along the mountainside. You and your men descend a route the Romans never considered, circling completely around their position while they wait, watching an empty path, for an assault that's already happening behind them. The result is not close. Their camp falls apart in chaos and panic. Their weapons and supplies suddenly yours. Their confidence shattered in a single night by an enemy they were told wasn't worth a serious force in the first place. You feel something shift in your chest, watching that first real victory unfold exactly as you'd hoped. This was supposed to be the easy part for them, but it wasn't. And Rome, for the first time, stops laughing. Rome's answer to that first humiliation is another force, larger this time, led by a commander, convinced the previous defeat was simply bad luck. Rather than a warning worth respecting, you feel almost nothing but cold focus watching them approach, no fear. Left in this particular confrontation, only calculation. You've learned something in the weeks since that first victory that this new commander hasn't yet figured out. This is no longer a fight you're improvising as you go. This is becoming a war you know how to win. You split your forces, feint in one direction, strike in another, using the same terrain advantage that broke the first army set against you. The new commander's forces scatter into confusion faster than even you expected. Discipline collapsing the moment their formation breaks under an attack coming from a direction they never prepared to defend. By the time it's over, you've taken his equipment, his supplies, and in a detail that will make its way back to Rome faster than almost anything else that happens in this entire war, his own horse, seized in the chaos of his hurried, undignified retreat. You feel the weight of that particular humiliation land differently in Rome than the first defeat did. One loss can be explained away as misfortune. Two losses to the same enemy in rapid succession cannot. Word spreads faster now through the countryside, through the slave quarters of every farm and household within reach of the story. Not just that you're free, that you're winning, repeatedly, against real Roman forces sent with real Roman confidence. And failing anyway, every new arrival at your camp carries that same story a little further outward, and you feel, watching your numbers climb week after week, the full shape of what's building around you. This has stopped being an escape. This is becoming exactly what Rome fears most. Proof, spreading fast, that the people it depends on to stay powerless don't have to stay that way. What follows moves faster than anyone in Rome is prepared for. Force after force gets sent south to end this quickly, quietly, before it becomes an embarrassment too large to ignore. Force after force fails. You know this terrain now in a way no Roman commander sent against you ever will. You know which valleys funnel an army into a trap, which ridgelines offer cover for an ambush no one will see coming until it's already too late to matter. You fight the way the terrain itself seems to want you to fight, fast, unpredictable, refusing every single time to meet a larger force on ground of their choosing. Every defeated legion becomes more than a battlefield victory. It becomes recruitment. More slaves hear the reports. More of them slip away from farms and households and mines across the region, drawn by the growing, undeniable proof that this rebellion isn't simply surviving, it's winning again and again. Against the single most powerful military force the ancient world has ever produced. Your numbers swell past anything a scattered band of escaped gladiators should ever have been able to reach. 60,000. Some accounts push the figure even higher, closer to 120,000. An army built almost entirely from people the empire never once imagined capable of organizing, let alone winning. You feel the full, staggering weight of that shift settle into your chest every time a new victory report spreads through your camp. Less than 2 years ago, you were being trained to die in an arena for entertainment. Now, you are the single greatest military threat the Roman Republic has faced in a generation, and Rome finally fully is afraid. Not every man who follows you wants the same thing you want, and by the second year, that difference finally cracks open into something you can no longer smooth over with shared victories alone. You've begun thinking further ahead than most of your commanders are willing to imagine, north, toward the Alps, toward the border where this enormous, unwieldy army might finally scatter safely back toward the homeland stolen from all of you in the first place. Freedom, in your mind, was never only about defeating Rome. It was about getting out from under it entirely. Not everyone agrees. A significant portion of your army, led by a fierce, popular commander named Crassus, wants something different. They've tasted victory after victory against the greatest power in the world. Some of them want to keep tasting it, raiding the wealthy Italian countryside, striking directly at the empire that enslaved them rather than simply escaping its reach. You feel the tension of that disagreement settle heavy over your camp in the weeks it takes to fully surface. These aren't strangers arguing strategy. These are men who bled beside you at Vesuvius, who trusted your judgment completely when the odds looked far worse than they do now. The argument doesn't resolve cleanly. Eventually, Crassus takes a large portion of the army and splits away, determined to keep fighting on Italian soil rather than retreat toward the mountains. You watch them go with a tightness in your chest that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with dread. You know something about Roman patience that this new, confident splinter of your army hasn't yet learned the hard way. Rome has stopped underestimating you. It has not. Apparently stopped underestimating overconfidence. Word reaches you weeks later, and you feel it land in your chest like a physical blow. Crassus's forces have been caught by a Roman consular army near Mount Garganus, surrounded and destroyed almost entirely. Crassus himself is among the dead. You feel the full weight of that loss settle over your remaining army like a shadow that won't lift. Not just grief for men you fought beside, a colder, harder recognition, too, that the momentum carrying this rebellion forward has limits, and those limits have just been proven in blood. You gather your remaining forces, and for the first time since Vesuvius, you feel the true, crushing scale of what you're actually up against. This war is no longer simply about winning. It's about whether any of you survive it at all. While you're fighting battle after battle across the countryside, something is happening inside Rome itself that you only hear about secondhand, carried by captured messengers and frightened deserters. Fear, real fear, not the distant, abstract kind a wealthy city usually reserves for problems happening somewhere else. You learn that some among Rome's elite have started making contingency plans of their own, quietly arranging for their households and fortunes in case this rebellion somehow reaches the capital itself. You learn that your name, once an irrelevant detail buried in a minor provincial report, is now spoken in the Senate with the same weight once reserved for Rome's most feared foreign enemies. You feel something almost disorienting in that realization. Less than 2 years ago, you were property, a line item in some slave trader's ledger, valuable only for how well you might perform your own death in an arena. Now the single greatest political body in the known world debates, with real anxiety, what to do about you. You hear stories, likely exaggerated in the retelling, but revealing all the same, of ordinary Romans altering their own routines out of fear that your army might somehow appear closer than expected, merchants delaying trips south, households strengthening their own security, as though the chaos spreading through the countryside might somehow reach even the capital's protected streets. None of this comes from any real strategic threat to the city itself. Your army's focus has always been survival and escape, never a march on Rome. But fear rarely bothers to check its own accuracy once it starts spreading, and you feel a grim, complicated satisfaction in knowing that even the possibility of you unsettles a city that has spent centuries assuming its own permanence. You think briefly of that first practice arena in Capua, the applause, the casual cruelty, the complete certainty of everyone watching that men like you existed purely for their entertainment and nothing more. They are not laughing anymore. Whatever else happens in the battles still ahead, you've already proven something no slave revolt before yours ever managed to prove so completely that the empire's confidence was never as solid as it wanted everyone, especially the people it enslaved, to believe. Word reaches you soon after Crassus's destruction of what's coming next, and you feel the shape of this war shift beneath your feet the moment you hear it. Small forces, second-rate commanders, half-hearted campaigns, all of that is finished now. The Roman Senate, humiliated repeatedly by an army of former slaves, finally commits to ending this properly, no matter the cost. They send Marcus Crassus, one of the richest men Rome has ever produced, a commander with the resources, the political weight, and the sheer determination to succeed where every previous force sent against you has failed. This isn't a formality anymore. This isn't an inconvenience being handled by whoever happened to be nearby. This is Rome's full focused attention, finally turned entirely toward crushing you. You feel that shift ripple through your own camp, too, the mood sharpening into something more serious than the confident momentum that's carried you this far. Crassus doesn't rush the way earlier commanders did. He builds, he fortifies. He begins constructing massive earthworks designed specifically to trap your army rather than simply meet it in open battle. For the first time since Vesuvius, you feel something that isn't quite fear, but sits close enough beside it to make your chest tighten every time. You study the growing fortifications along your flank. This is no longer a rebellion Rome is embarrassed by. This is a war Rome has decided. Absolutely. It cannot afford to lose it's with this new, patient, well-resourced enemy bearing down on you that you make your decision to turn south toward the coast, toward whatever chance the sea might still offer you in the aftermath of that loss. You make a decision that will define everything that follows. You will not repeat Crassus's mistake. Whatever pull remains in some of your commanders to keep raiding deeper into Roman territory, you understand now with total clarity exactly what that ambition costs when Rome finally commits its full attention to ending it. You turn your army south instead, toward the coast, toward a plan that might finally get thousands of your people fully out of Rome's reach, not north over the Alps this time, but across the water entirely toward Sicily, an island with its own long, bitter history of slave uprisings, fertile ground for a rebellion to take root somewhere. Rome's legions can't simply march to overnight. You make contact with Cilician pirates along the coast, seafaring raiders with no loyalty to Rome and a well-earned reputation for making deals with anyone willing to pay. You offer them payment gathered from months of raids and plunder, in exchange for ships enough to carry a significant portion of your army across the strait to Sicily. You feel something close to hope for the first time in weeks, watching that agreement take shape. A new island, a new uprising, potentially, joining forces with slave populations already primed by their own region's history of rebellion. A chance, finally, at something more permanent than simply outlasting the next Roman army sent against you. You feel your army's spirits lift with that same hope. Word of the plan spreading through the camp with the same eager momentum that once carried you off Vesuvius. For a little while, escape feels close enough to touch. That feeling will not survive contact with the pirates. True intentions that you spend days along that coastline waiting, and each one stretches longer than the last dot at first. The waiting feels almost peaceful compared to the relentless motion of the campaign. So far, your army gathered on open ground near the shore, watching a gray winter sea for sails that in your mind are already on their way. You walk the beach yourself some mornings, studying the horizon with the same patient focus you once studied enemy formations, searching for any dark shape against the pale line where sky meets water. Nothing comes, you tell yourself, the first few days, that weather has simply delayed them, or caution, or the ordinary friction of coordinating ships across unfamiliar waters. You've trusted worse odds than this, and come out ahead. You allow yourself to keep believing it a little longer than the evidence probably deserves, but the days accumulate, and with them a colder, quieter dread starts spreading through your camp that no amount of forced optimism can fully hold back. Supplies meant to last only until the crossing began running thinner than planned. Men who spent those first hopeful days imagining Sicily, imagining a rebellion large enough to finally outlast Rome for good, start instead watching that same empty horizon with expressions that have shifted from anticipation into something far more familiar to all of you. Suspicion. You feel it too. Standing on that beach one final morning, studying a horizon that has offered nothing but gray water and disappointment for longer than any honest business delay could reasonably explain. The pirates took your gold. They were never coming. The ships never come. You wait along the coast. Your army gathered and ready, payment already delivered in good faith, and the pirates simply vanish, taking your gold, breaking their word, leaving you exactly where Rome would want you stranded, with no path across the water and an enemy closing in from the only direction left open to you. You feel a specific, bitter kind of anger settle into your chest at that betrayal. Different from anything Roman legions have made you feel across 2 years of fighting them directly. An honest enemy you can plan against. A broken promise from men who owed you nothing, but their word leaves you with nothing to strike back at. No battlefield to make them answer for it on dot. And while you're absorbing that betrayal, Crassus isn't wasting the opportunity it hands him. You learn with growing dread exactly what he's been building while your attention was fixed on the coastline and a fleet that was never coming. A wall, not a simple blockade, but an enormous fortified ditch and rampart, stretching across the narrow width of the peninsula you're now trapped on, sealing off your entire army's only remaining route back into open Italian territory. You feel the full, suffocating shape of that trap settle over your camp as the true scale of it becomes clear. Sea on one side, offering nothing without ships you no longer have. Crassus's wall on the other, growing longer and stronger with every passing day you spend deciding what to do about it. For the first time since escaping that gladiator school in Capua, you feel something that isn't quite panic, but sits close enough beside it to keep. You awake long after your camp is finally gone. Quiet. You are trapped. And the only way out is straight through. The wall built specifically to make sure that's impossible. You don't wait for starvation to make the decision for you. Winter has settled fully over the camp by the time you finally move, cold and brutal, supplies dwindling faster than anyone wants to admit aloud. You choose a night when the weather turns worst, driving snow, low visibility, conditions that make Crassus's sentries less alert and less able to see trouble coming until it's already on top of them. You lead the assault yourself, exactly as you have since the very first battle after Vesuvius. The plan is brutal in its simplicity. Fill sections of Crassus's ditch with whatever you can gather. Fallen trees, debris, even the bodies of animals and fallen. Men when nothing else is fast enough. creating makeshift crossings, under cover of the storm before the alarm can, fully spread down the length of his fortifications. You feel the chaos of that. Night blur together the way the worst battles always do. Cold and motion and the specific focused violence of men who understand perfectly well what happens if this attempt fails. Roman sentries, caught off guard by both the weather and the sheer audacity of the assault, fall back in confusion along sections of the wall never designed to hold against a concentrated, desperate breakthrough dot at works. Your army pours through the gap before Crassus can fully organize a response, spilling back out into open Italian territory. The trap that seemed absolute only hours earlier suddenly impossibly broken. You feel something fierce and exhausted swell in your chest, watching your remaining forces stream past the breach into the dark, snow-covered countryside beyond. Rome's finest general, its wealthiest commander, backed by the full resources of the Senate, built a wall specifically to end this rebellion, and you tore straight through it in a single desperate night. But you feel something else, too, underneath that fierce relief. Something colder and more honest. You bought time. You did not buy safety. Crassus is still out there, still commanding an army far larger than what remains of yours. And this narrow escape has done nothing to change the fundamental math working steadily against you with every week that passes. Freedom from the wall doesn't mean freedom from Crassus. He regroups fast, humiliated by the breakout, and resumes the pursuit with a renewed, almost personal determination to end this before it costs him anything more than it already has. You feel his army shadowing yours across the winter countryside, never quite catching you outright, never quite letting you rest either. And the pressure isn't only coming from Crassus. Any more word reaches your camp that the Senate, unwilling to trust this war to one commander alone any longer, has recalled two of Rome's most capable generals to help finish it, one marching up from a campaign in Spain, another returning from the East. You feel the full weight of that news land hard in your chest. This was already the greatest military power in the world, fully focused on destroying you. Now it's sending reinforcements on top of that, unwilling to leave anything to chance. Your own army feels the strain, too. Exhausted, reduced by the wall's breakout and the long winter chase since. Some of your remaining commanders push again for splitting the force, striking out on their own rather than staying bound to a single, increasingly hunted army. You feel that old fracture threatening to reopen. The same instinct that cost Crassus everything, now tempting men who watched that exact lesson unfold and somehow still feel the pull toward independence. You hold what you can hold together. Not all of it. Small groups peel away regardless, chasing their own chances. And you feel each departure like a small additional weight settling onto everything still resting on your shoulders, with the clarity that keeps you awake long after the rest of the camp has gone quiet. Exactly what's closing in from every direction now. Crassus behind you, patient and furious. Reinforcements approaching from elsewhere, eager to claim credit for finishing what he struggled to finish alone. your own numbers thinning with every week this chase continues. There will be no more clever escapes. Whatever happens next will be decided in a single, final, desperate confrontation. On ground you may not get to choose, and you already know deep in your chest exactly how unlikely it is that you walk away from it. Somewhere in the middle of this campaign, on a rare, quiet evening between battles, you find yourself thinking about home for the first time and longer than you'd realized. Not Capua, not the arena. Thrace, cold mountains, a life that belonged to you before Rome decided otherwise. You don't know, in this moment, whether anyone from that life is even still alive, whether word of what you've become has traveled far enough to reach the place you started. You wonder, sometimes, what they'd think of you now, not the legend already starting to build around your name in whispered conversations across the Italian countryside. Just you, a man who learned to survive an arena, then learned to survive far worse than that, then decided somewhere along the way that survival alone wasn't enough anymore. You think about the plan that once seemed so clear, north, over the Alps, scattering this army back toward homelands like the one you're remembering right now, letting thousands of stolen lives find their way back to whatever remained of the ones Rome interrupted. You feel a quiet grief at how far that plan has drifted from where you now stand, trapped between a coastline that betrayed you and a general who won't stop hunting you. But you feel something else, too, sitting with that memory of cold Thracian mountains, under a very different sky than the one stretched out above you tonight. Whatever happens from here, you already did something that Thrace, that Rome, that every system built on the assumption people like you exist only to serve others, said was impossible. You said no, not quietly, not just once. For nearly 2 years now, loudly, repeatedly, in a way that forced the greatest power in the ancient world to stop, panic, and finally take you seriously as a genuine threat to everything it assumed was permanent. You feel that thought settle warm into your chest. Even here, even now, with the odds stacked as heavily against you as they've ever been, home may be lost to you. The plan to return there may already be beyond reach, but the man who left Thrace in chains is not the same man sitting here tonight, and no outcome waiting in the days ahead can undo the distance between those two versions of yourself. The night before the final battle, you do something you haven't allowed yourself to do in weeks. You slow down, you move through camp the way you did in the earliest days after Vesuvius, sitting with small groups around low fires rather than retreating into whatever isolation your position might excuse. No one pretends any more about what tomorrow likely holds. You feel that shared, unspoken understanding in every fire you visit. Not despair, exactly. Something steadier and more complicated than that dot at one fire. A woman who joined your army back when it was still only a few hundred strong tells you, without being asked, that she has no regrets. Whatever happens tomorrow, she says, she has spent 2 years as something other than property, and no outcome tomorrow can undo that fact. You feel those words settle deep into your chest. carrying more weight than any battlefield victory has managed across this entire campaign dot at another fire. Younger men who escaped fields and households only months ago sit in a tighter, quieter cluster, and you sense the fear in them more openly than in the veterans who fought beside you since the beginning. You don't offer false comfort. You simply sit with them a while, the way an older, steadier presence sometimes does more good than any words could. Somewhere in the dark beyond the firelight, you hear low singing start up, a song in a language you don't fully understand, carried by voices from some corner of the empire, far from your own birthplace. And yet the melody itself needs no translation. It's the sound of people who have already decided whatever tomorrow brings. Tonight belongs to them completely. You feel your chest tighten, listening to it carry across the dark camp dot 2 years ago. You were being trained to die alone. For strangers who would forget your name before the applause even finished. Tonight, surrounded by thousands of people who chose, however briefly, however impossibly, to stop being what Rome told them they had to be. You feel something that isn't quite peace, but sits close enough beside it to let you finally close your eyes for a few hours before dawn. Whatever happens tomorrow, this already happened. No battle, won or lost, can take that back. You make your choice before Crassus can finish tightening the trap completely. Rather than wait for the walls to fully close, you commit to a final desperate confrontation, meeting his forces directly, gambling everything on one last chance to break through before your army's dwindling advantages disappear entirely. Your men know what this means. You feel it in the camp the final morning before the march, a different kind of quiet than any that settled over your army before. Not the confident quiet of men certain of victory. Something heavier. Something closer to men making peace with an outcome they already sense in their bones. You move among them anyway, exactly as you have since Vesuvius, refusing the distance a lesser commander might retreat into as the odds grow this steep. These men followed you out of slavery into something that for a little while felt impossibly close to freedom and victory both. Whatever comes today, you intend to meet it standing beside them, not behind them. The march toward Crassus's position stretches the morning into something that feels both endless and far too short. You feel your own pulse settling into a strange, focused calm as the enemy lines finally come into view across the field ahead. Legion after disciplined legion roams full. Committed weight finally arrayed against the army you built from nothing but stolen kitchen knives and the sheer refusal of thousands of enslaved people to accept the life assigned to them. You feel no regret. Studying that overwhelming force, whatever happens today, you already changed something that can never fully be undone. What follows is chaos, brutal and total. Exactly the kind of fighting you learned first in a training yard, built to prepare men for death rather than survival. Your army fights with everything it has left. Every advantage of terrain and surprise long since stripped away by Crassus's patient encirclement. This is no longer guerrilla warfare fought on ground of your choosing. This is a direct, grinding confrontation against Rome's foe. disciplined might, and you feel the weight of that imbalance in every clash along your line. You fight near the front, exactly where you fought since the very first battle on Vesuvius, refusing every instinct that might tell a lesser commander to retreat toward safety, while the outcome still hangs in the balance. Somewhere in the chaos, according to what history manages to piece together afterward, you make one final, desperate push, cutting through toward Crassus himself, driven by some last fierce hope that killing the man commanding this overwhelming force might still, somehow, change everything. You don't reach him. The fighting closes around you instead. Overwhelming, final, exactly the kind of ending the arena once tried to train you to accept without complaint. You fall. History will never fully agree on the exact moment, the exact place, the exact final details. Your body is never definitively identified among the thousands scattered across that final, brutal battlefield. One final act of defiance, even in death, refusing Rome the satisfaction of a confirmed, displayed ending to parade before the public. But the war itself is over, and Rome, however relieved, will spend the rest of its history unable to fully forget how close an army of escaped slaves came to, shaking the entire republic to its foundations. What Rome does next is meant to erase every trace of doubt that this rebellion ever posed a real threat. Roughly 6,000 survivors, men who followed you from Vesuvius through 2 years of victories no one believed possible, are crucified along the Appian Way, a single road stretching over 200 kilometers, connecting Rome to the very region where this uprising first began. The bodies are left exposed for years, not simply executions. A message deliberately public, deliberately impossible to ignore for anyone traveling that road, any slave anywhere in the empire who might someday consider doing exactly what you did. This is Rome answering the fear you caused with the largest, most brutal warning it has ever staged. Imagine for a moment what that road becomes in the months and years that follow. Merchants driving carts to market, messengers carrying news between cities, ordinary travelers, families, children, all of them forced to pass beneath mile after mile of crosses, stretching toward the horizon in both directions, a permanent, deliberate reminder built into the very geography connecting Rome to the world it ruled. Some who pass beneath those crosses will feel exactly what Rome intends them to feel: fear. Deterrence, the crushing weight of a system determined to make an example so total that rebellion itself starts to feel unthinkable again. But some, you imagine walking that same road years later, will feel something else entirely. Not fear, recognition, a quiet, dangerous understanding that 6,000 crucifixions were the price Rome paid, not for suppressing a minor disturbance, but for barely surviving a war it very nearly lost to people it had spent centuries insisting could never pose a real threat at all. You feel, even from wherever this story leaves you now, the full, crushing weight of that final image, mile after mile of crucified men, punished not for what they did, but for what they proved was possible. that an empire this vast, this powerful, this certain of its own permanence, could still be made to panic by people it had decided, long before any of this began, weren't fully human enough to. Matter. It cost thousands of lives to prove that fear wrong even briefly, but it was proven wrong. And an empire that built its entire identity on absolute control spent the rest of its existence unable to fully erase the fact that for 2 years it wasn't in control at all. Rome eventually fell the way every empire eventually does, its monuments crumbling, its legions scattered into memory, its absolute certainty of its own permanence proven, in the end, no more permanent than anything else, built by human hands. Your name outlived all of it, not because history preserved every detail of your life with perfect accuracy. It didn't, and it never will, the gaps in your origin and your final moments remaining exactly that. Gaps filled in over centuries by legend wherever fact ran out. But the core of it, the part that actually mattered, survived intact through every retelling. A man taken from freedom, sold like property, trained to die for entertainment, who refused, completely and irreversibly, to accept that fate, who turned kitchen knives and desperate resolve into an army capable of terrifying the greatest military power the ancient world ever produced. Centuries later, movements fighting against oppression in places you could never have imagined would still be invoking your name, still finding in your story the same thing your original 70 escaped gladiators found on that first desperate night. Proof that the systems built to keep people powerless are not, in fact, unbreakable. You feel that legacy settle now, heavy and warm, into this final quiet moment of the story. You did not survive, but you were never fully erased either, and somewhere, in that narrow space between total defeat and total erasure, something worth remembering managed to survive after all. You don't need to carry any of this weight a moment longer. Let the arena fade first, the training yard, the sparring drills, the cold calculation of men preparing you to die well rather than live free. Let it dissolve quietly into darkness. Let the mountain fade next. Vesuvius, the vine ropes in the dark. The first stolen victory that convinced thousands of others their own chains might not be permanent after all. Let the battles fade, the guerrilla ambushes, the humiliated legions, the walls Crassus built stone by careful stone to finally close the trap that had eluded him for so long. Even the ending, the final march, the last battle, the road lined with crucified men. Let it soften now, the way the sharpest edges of any story eventually soften once it's finally been told all the way through. You don't have to be Spartacus anymore. You don't have to be anyone at all right now. Just breath, slow and even. Just warmth, heavy and familiar, wherever you're actually resting tonight. Just the wide, quiet dark, opening up around you the way it always does, patient and unhurried, ready to hold you exactly as long as you need. Let your body sink a little deeper now. Let your breathing slow further, on its own, without needing to be told to. Let this whole story loosen its grip. drifting gently away into the same soft, endless dark that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to convince the world it never would. You are safe, you are free, and there is nothing left now but sleep. Arriving slowly, the way it always eventually does, quiet, complete and entirely yours.